We have one presentation tonight. If the clerk would please read that.
Joe Heffernan from Plante Moran and City Manager James Freed will give a presentation regarding the city's unfunded liabilities.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. As I promised you back in the spring, we were expecting a new valuation study from MERS to come in regarding our unfunded pension obligations and our current status of our pension system. And so tonight we wanted to brief you on the updated valuation statement that you were all sent, along with the valuation statement of our OPEBs. So we're going to give you a quick update. But before then, I want to take a moment to talk to the employees of the City of Port Huron and to the pensioners and to the retirees who, a lot of them are at home tonight watching on TV. I want to talk to a moment about them. First and foremost, under the Michigan State Constitution, their pension is protected. We cannot take away what we have promised them. It is constitutionally protected. So for the retiree at home tonight who relies on their pension, I want them to know that that pension is secure, that there is $79 million of cash assets in the fund. And so what we're talking about is a problem that could fester down the road if left unaddressed. I also want to talk to the City of Port Huron employees, let them know that what they have earned is constitutionally protected and cannot be cut or taken away. And so I think for the retirees that are at home and for the city employees, I just want to make that clear. I know when we talk about unfunded liabilities, it's a remarkably complex issue, and the unknowns can scare people. And so I wanted to, rest assured tonight that let them know that is safe, secure, and we cannot be taken away. What we do have to address is, as a city, how do we fund these obligations while at the same time delivering quality essential services that our residents deserve and, quite frankly, need? And that is the crux of the issue, and that is why we came here to brief you tonight. MERS conducted a recent experience study, and what an experience study is, it looks at a couple things. One, mortality tables. People are living longer. The assumed rate of return, it was about 8.25. They've moved it to 7 3/4. We view that as highly optimistic. I think around 5 3/4, somewhere in there is a more reasonable estimate for return. But the issue is they're requiring shorter amortization periods to pay off this. And what that means is your payment period. So if this was a mortgage on your house, we used to have a 30-year mortgage. Now we have a 23-year mortgage. And that is drastically raising our annual contributions. And to be perfectly clear, every budget issue we've had in the last decade is directly linked to our annual contributions for our unfunded liabilities. That's what's driving the budget issues every year. As a result of our newest valuation statement, our unfunded liabilities before was at $53 million. Today that number has increased to $66 million. And that's on a 7 3/4 return rate assumption. If you drop that assumption to 5 3/4, the unfunded liability rate raises to $103 million of unfunded liabilities in our pension. I want to show you our general fund history and projections moving forward. This is our revenue estimates in our general fund, relatively stagnant for the next several years going forward. But then here's our required payments for our unfunded liabilities. So the concern is when you have stagnant revenue and growing annual payments, you get this. And here's where we are this year. We have about a $600,000 structural deficit this year that we use fund balance to cover. If left unaddressed, we'll have about a $1.2 million deficit next year, moving to a $2.5 million deficit, moving to north of a $3 million deficit by 2019. And what's driving that is our annual contributions. Last year, it was about $3.2 million we paid in. This year, it's going to be $4.9 million. And that will raise to north of $8 million within the next 5 years. And that increase, whatever we see increase in our unfunded liability payments, 63% of that burden is bore by the general fund. So if we go up $1 million in our annual contributions, $630,000 that comes out of the general fund. And here's our payments. There's our pension payments and then our pension and OPEB payments, and you see them drastically rising in the next 5 years. And again, what's causing that is to prevent a liquidity issue within the pension fund they are shortening our amortization period, essentially saying you can't have a 30-year timeline to pay it off because you'll run out of cash 10 or 15 years down the road. And so they're shortening the payoff period to infuse the fund with cash. The city of Port Huron would like to look at bonding out our unfunded liabilities. A lot of other communities are looking at that. That's something we are interested in. This would create a longer amortization period or a payment plan to pay off the debt. Instead of a 23-year payoff plan, we could have a 30-year payoff plan, which would reduce our annual payments, which would allow us to, one, deliver quality public safety and parks and recreation, while at the same time fulfilling the obligations to our retirees and our city employees. So we want to stretch out the payments. To do that, a roundabout estimate would be about $104 million for pension and OPEBs. Currently, the state law requires that you have a AA bond rating. However, the city of Port Huron only has an A+ bond rating because in the 3 out of the 4 previous years before I got here, our bond rating was downgraded. Under the Home Rule Act, you have essentially a credit line of 10% of your SEV. So in the city of Port Huron, we have about $600 million of SEV. That means we've got a $60 million credit line. And about $20 million of debt currently is outstanding for street projects and public infrastructure projects. So really, we got about a $40 million credit line left. Possible solutions. You've probably noticed I've been traveling all over the state of Michigan. I've met now with more than 100 city managers. I have held a summit at the Michigan Municipal League with more than 100 communities represented. I have met with the state treasurer. I have met with the director of the policy for the governor's office. I've met with members of the House and Senate. And I've met with our head lobbyist for the Michigan Municipal League, Chris Hackbarth. One of the things we're looking at is a legislative prescription that would drop the threshold from AA to A, essentially qualifying the city of Port Huron to utilize refinancing debts to help stretch out these payments. We're also looking at exempting any refinancing debts from the Home Rule Act cap or any other statutory capital improvement debt limit. And the reason for this is, under accounting standards, these unfunded liabilities, we owe them. This isn't just some maybe debt. This is debt we owe. And so it's realized debt. So we're not creating a new liability. We're essentially restructuring and refinancing our current liability to have manageable payments. I compare this to the mortgage crisis. A lot of people just need to refinance their mortgage to get more manageable payments to survive. That's what we need to do. And so we're working with our state partners around the state. And one thing that's important, and Councilwoman Ashford, you mentioned this is a universal problem. And that statement stuck with me because it is. We met with more than 100 cities because more than 100 cities across this great state are facing this exact same crisis. We have some communities where their annual contributions will more than double in 2 years, and they simply don't know how they're going to afford it. I've talked to cities like Midland, a very wealthy community that doesn't know how they'll make it past 5 years. The city of Coldwater, Michigan, which will have their ARC payment doubled in the next 2 years. Rogers City, Grand Haven, Muskegon, Jackson, Bay City. This is a universal problem that requires a statewide legislative prescription to help us out. I want to introduce to you now Joe Heffernan, as you all know him from before. He is our independent auditing firm, and I asked him to go over last year's pension payments and pension fund report and the valuation report so we could have some expert opinion of where exactly we are and what we're looking at.
Thank you, James. And I really do want to just reiterate, since I am somewhat independent and I deal a lot with, we have about 125 governments in Michigan, that this really is a universal issue with all units of government that have been using defined benefit pension plans, which is the vast majority, 85%, 90%. Prior to the year 2000 to 2005, somewhere in that range before, including Port Huron, everyone was really very well funded. And really 2 big things have happened to drastically change that. The one being the investment returns. We all know in 2008 and 2009, the stock market took about a 25% drop. But it has not come back so that you'd say, well, in the last 10 years, we've earned that 10% that the stock market has earned. And everyone is debating right now, what does that mean? Can we still count on 8% returns, which was really the average for all pension plans since World War II? And everybody has a different answer, but they usually start with no. but it could be no, but I think we'll be close. I think maybe we'll be 7.5 to 7 3/4, or no, but I think it's drastically changed. I think it's going to be 6% or less than 6%. And so we had a lot of different answers, and then we don't know the answer. The second thing, besides the returns not being there, would be the fact that the good news is everyone's living longer. The bad news is everybody's living longer, and that means the pension system has to pay much more than it originally projected. As we look at this debt, James is right. This is very similar to having bonds. It's a debt. We must pay it. It's constitutionally guaranteed, and James is absolutely right. This is not like I have a mortgage, I can't afford it, I can walk away. The city can't walk away. No city in Michigan can walk away from this benefit. Once a public pension, which is different than private pensions, once a public pension in Michigan has been earned, it cannot be diminished, it cannot be taken away. And so that's good news, that's a good protection for the employees. But it means the city has to find a way to deal with this. One of the critical differences from having a long-term debt or a fixed debt, because this is very much like a fixed debt, but it's a squishy number. I'm sorry, I can't tell you exactly what those payments will be or exactly what the amount of the debt is. These are the actuary's best guesses, and the guesses are getting better, but that's what's causing it to be a higher guess of what that liability actually is. So with that said, the best cities can do is take the best actuarial information that's using good neutral type assumptions that really is everybody's best guess and not a rosy colored type of assumption, and then deal with that and figure out how to honor those obligations that we've made. And maybe part of it could be, do we change future service type obligations? Maybe, maybe not, depending on whether that can be fit into the budget. So one of the things that we've done here, it really, not to scare you, but to try to put into perspective what we're paying today. And off to the left is just a calculation of how do the accountants come up with pension expense. And you see the calculation, second line from the bottom, is $5.3 million. This was what we showed you a year ago, from June 30, 2015. In a minute, we'll update this for 2016. But the number below that, the required contribution based on the actual evaluation, was $3.2 million. What that means is if we're paying less than the $5.3 million, then the net liability, the net pension obligation netted with any deferred inflows or outflows, all those pension liabilities together, those three that are on your financial statement, is going to continue to grow. And that is what's going to happen, I guarantee you, for the next few years, even with the increases in the contributions that are being required. That number will be growing for a few years, and we're hoping that what MERS is doing with their changes is going to make that line in 3 years, 4 years start to decline a little bit.
So it will influence that bottom line?
And will influence that. What I would like to see in a healthier situation would be the amount of the contribution, the $3.2 million, is more than the cost of pensions up above. Now, the cost of the pensions for this particular year included a small amount, $303,000, third line from the bottom, of amortization of some of the differences that take place. We're going to see when we move to the next year that that's a very significant number. I'll go ahead and do that. This is now updated for 2016. Those experience differences, the changes in assumptions, and investment differences grew to $4.2 million. Those will be amortized over a 4 to 5 year period, but that'll keep this number high for 4 to 5 years. Because in the calendar year 2015, investment returns were actually negative rather than the positive 8%. That's a gigantic difference. Secondly, MERS made these changes to update to the more accurate mortality tables. So one of the things I said is the good news is people are living longer. Actuaries try to estimate how long everyone will live, and they realized a few years ago, boy, there's been a real shift throughout the 2000s with an extension of how long people are living, which is a very good thing for you and me, but not for the numbers, if you will, for saying what will it then take to pay the pension benefits for that longer time period. So MERS made those changes, and that was an additional, that was about half of this experience difference that we saw for the current year was the change in assumptions, which will be coming in over about a 4-year period for us. So off to the right, we just compared the two bars. What was actually required contribution and what would that pension expense be that would keep that net pension liability amount even and stop it from growing? The good news is that MERS, on the bottom line, required annual contribution, I'll show you in just a minute, with their changes in assumptions, they're bringing this in over a 5-year period, and they will be asking that required contribution to be going up increasingly over the next 5 years. And on the other side, the total cost of pensions, that $4.2 million, will absolutely be coming down, and in a perfect world, will be a very small number after 4 to 5 years. So I hope that will come down into the $4.5 million range, $4.5 to $5 million, and the required contributions are scheduled to go up well in excess of that, which we'll see in a minute. So it will be turning around, and that's good. It means you'll be getting better managed in your pension system. What that also means, as James was showing, as a percentage of the budget, that's going to continue to grow in order to enable that to happen. And it will have to happen because MERS is doing their best to be good stewards, good fiduciaries of the pension system, and they've put those changes in place because they're convinced it is more realistic. That's why you do an actuarial study, to say we're making all these assumptions of returns and how long people will live and at what point do people retire and all those things, and do they have spouses? There's 100 assumptions that they use, and the experience study looks at all of those over a 5-year period and says, how did we do? That's why they made these adjustments. And MERS has told me that they will continue now to do experience studies every 3 to 5 years and continue to fine-tune and change the assumptions. So as we look at this next chart, if you look at the far left in the year 2000, we were more than 100% funded at the City of Port Huron. We were in really good shape. There had been some benchmarks historically that I've seen, and there's no science behind it, but I've been doing this 37 years, and the 80% funded has been a benchmark that a lot of governments have used around the country. It doesn't make it right or wrong, but it's just kind of out there, that if you're above 80%, you're getting close enough to 100%, you're managing your system well. 100% certainly is the goal, and it's great to see that that's where the City of Port Huron was at the start of this chart.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Showing this trend chart, and we could see, quite clearly that it kept going up. So why did we have to wait to 2015 and 2012 to start getting serious about that we needed to do something about it?
Right. So in the orange line, we see in the years 2003, 4, 5, it was kind of stagnating. It actually went down a little bit from 2001 to 2002. Right. And most actuaries try not to look over a 2 or 3 year history or period of time. Actuaries try to look over 10, 20. They think in decades. They don't think in terms of a couple of years because they know there's going to be some anomalies. So that would not have concerned the actuaries. But look in 2006 and 7, that's when we started to see some of the market changes. In the orange line, the assets have been consistently going down since then.
Oh, okay, so that kind of like countered that
Exactly.
trend. Okay.
Yes.
All
And the blue line was increasing, but it continued to steadily increase, and the blue line is the pension liability, and most of that blue line increasing was because of the increasing, or should I say decreasing mortality, with people living longer. And so when they set the assumptions, they've got tables of on average, how long does a male live, how long does a female live, and people were continuously, year after year, just exceeding that. And in 2015, we see a bump, and that's the adjustment to the new set of assumptions with the new mortality tables, et cetera.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's like a forecast change.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. And
All
so
right.
one of the things MERS started doing, and I'll put that on here, because of these changes and knowing the impact to all the communities in Michigan, is for the first time last year, MERS started projecting what they believe the future contributions will be. If all their guesses are accurate and people retire when they expect to and all those assumptions come true, what do they think will happen with the pension contribution? And we see for the year that we're in right now, slightly over $4 million, and as James said, growing to $4.9 million next year, but continuing to grow up to $8 million, well in excess of that $4.5 million number that we were kind of benchmarking against a little while ago. So they are clearly setting this up so that it will be paying down the debt at some point into the future, but taking 5 or 6 years to get us up to that point, knowing that they can't slam all the communities immediately. So they're managing the system really very well, Every system is going through the same type of thing, and I think they've done the right thing with the assumptions. Having an experience study every 3 to 5 years, I think, is critical, because the number one uncertainty that is still there is what the rate of return will be. The whole world in public and private pension plans are debating this. If you go onto the internet, you'll find so many articles about it. It's unbelievable. I've never seen this much disagreement in terms of what will the yields be for all these pension plans over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And you have some of them. It is, I've been doing this a long time, and for our pension plans, when we audit them, we need to make sure that the rate is reasonable, and I can only look at trends. We look at what are all the other pension plans doing. It's kind of the theory of crowdfunding. The crowd tends to do the right thing in overall, and it is coming down. What had been 8 to 8.25% back in 2000 has come down to 7.75% to 7.5% now. So people's expectations are dampening. MERS is going along with that. If you ask me to bet 4 years from now, when the next experience study comes out, will they raise or lower the rate of return? It's more likely they'd lower it than they'd raise it. But again, I can't prognosticate what will happen. But it wouldn't shock me to come down another 0.25% based on the experience they're going to see over the next 4 years.
Thank you. Madam Mayor and Council, so my message to the state of Michigan has been very clear. We cannot cut the benefits, and we cannot legally raise taxes. We can't go out and increase taxes to pay for this, and we can't cut the pensions. And so currently we have one tool, and that one tool is to cut our operating expenses. My issue is you can only cut so much before you begin jeopardizing essential services. And I think we're at that point. We need to restructure the debt. We need to restructure the liability, because in its current form, we are unable to pay for the benefits we are offering. That is the harsh reality. And so we will continue working with our partners from around the state, with the Michigan Municipal League, with our auditors, with bond counsel, to find a way, whether that's through the legislative prescription or through bonding, to restructure the amortization period to give us more time to pay this debt. The issue is we have 333 retirees to 225 current employees. So the bulk share of this liability is already out the door. We can't adjust it. We can't change it. And so the only thing we have to work with is the current employees. And that's not enough to fix the problem. And so that is why we've been traveling around the state, telling our story, meeting with different city managers and mayors to find out who else is like this, who else has the same issues, to build a coalition. Positive news today that the House of Representatives is looking at some type of legislative prescription. The governor and state treasurer are keenly aware of this. I met with the state treasurer's office last Tuesday. We spoke in depth about what we can do, what we can't do. I think they recognize we need more tools in our toolbox than just a scalpel to cut. There's got to be more tools. And so we will see where this goes. I'm hoping that by later this fall or early spring, a better picture will emerge of what's going to happen. So when we start doing our budget development in the early spring for July, we can begin taking into account some of those possible changes. But we have a fiduciary obligation, and we are obligated under state constitution to balance the budget. And so I believe that this is one of the greatest challenges of our time, but I also believe it's a moral and ethical challenge. We have a moral and ethical obligation to our pensioners, to our retirees, and to be quite frank, to our current city employees who have worked very hard for this community, to protect what they've earned and to ensure that we are able to deliver on those promises. And so that's why I keep bringing this to the forefront, and I appreciate Joe coming all this way to work with us.
Would it help, one of those charts can do a really good job of explaining how a pension bond can help. Because I have found a lot of people that really struggle and say, geez, how is that going to really help us? When you look at this, if you were able to issue pension bonds, that $793,000 would still be there every year into the future. It's what we call normal cost. That, of the total bill we're paying of $4,151,000, it's only $793,000 that is the cost of current employees. And again, that reinforces.
And that's something to talk about as well. we have not sat idly by. That, I think, is important for the city of Port Huron residents to know. We have put our employees on a hybrid system now, where they are on a defined contribution plan, similar to our 457 401k, in addition to a smaller pension. Our employees are now paying 10, 11% of their wages into their pension system. That is why the current cost isn't, the biggest issue isn't the current employees. In fact, out of our fringe rate of 80%, right? 80% fringe rate, that's 80 cents on a dollar. 43 cents is for legacy cost, and 37 cents is for the current employee. I think that's important for people to know. We just haven't sat by on this. We haven't sat by on this at all regarding the OPEBs as well.
And to make that clear, the top two lines, 1.7 plus 100, so $1.9 million is the cost of the current employees for the current year. Of that, the current employees are paying, the third line, $1.1 million of it, and only 793. So the costs are being shared quite well. And 793,000 is not an outlandish number for the city. It's the prior stuff that's causing. And the second line, the $4.3 million, is just the interest on the net pension liability. If in a pension bond type situation, that number typically gets cut. The debt service is typically going to be about 2/3 of that number. And that's where the savings ends up coming in. So yes, you have to pay the debt service in lieu of paying this interest cost. Why do you not pay the interest cost? Because the fund with the debt becomes fully funded and has a zero, unfunded AAL. And so 0 times 8% is going to be 0. And that will not be getting charged in the future. There may be small charges, 5, 6, 7 years as their experience differences. But with these changes, it should be just as likely to be negative as positive, quite honestly. And so the amortization of the unfunded AAL really goes away and is replaced with the debt service. So that typically, if you just say 1/3 of that gets saved, that's $1.6, $1.7 million reduction in every year's budget going forward. That's how it helps.
In addition to just savings, so for instance, if you take $104 million and you bond that out at 3 3/4 on a 30-year note, that's about a $5.8 million annual payment. Our current annual contribution total is $7 million this year, and it's going to balloon to $8 million in the next 5 years. So what we're working on doing is if we can hedge the growth, infuse the fund with bond money, hedge the growth of the ARCs, stabilize our payments, we put predictability and stability, just like a refinancing your home mortgage, for years to come, which allows us to use the growth of general fund to begin enhancing our city services and sustaining our city services. And so, but here's the key point. We legally do not qualify for bonding right now. However, the state is keenly aware that we, without restructuring the debt, have no viable path forward after 36 months. That's what I've told the state. That's the honest truth. But the issue is, we are not alone, which is reassuring. It's kind of scary. When I first got this, I thought, oh my gosh, and then I realized, well, there's 100 other communities. Whew. So we're not alone. And I thought, oh my God, there's another 100 communities out there who are having the same issue. So restructuring the unfunded liabilities on a statewide level is going to be a legislative priority for this administration in the next 6 months. I can assure you that. Any questions?
Mayor Rapp?
Yes, Councilmember Archibald.
James, you're talking about restructuring only that for the retirees, correct?
No, we would restructure the liability for our entire liability.
So at
the
what
entire
point?
Unfunded liability.
Okay. The number at the top that's now 793 if the employees are paying in, that's based on our estimate of lifespan now, correct? So that could, after we bond this out, that could change again.
Correct.
So how are we going to control that, and what would we put into place to make sure we don't get there again?
I think we have to look with an actuarial and look at bond counsel and find a way to hedge that. And that's one of the questions that would be out there.
I have a question. Part of our budgetary concerns have been because of the loss of revenue sharing. So we haven't had the dollars we have to put into things. And I noticed on that one chart, right about the same time when we started getting this big gap was about the same time we started losing our revenue sharing. So I assume that we've put in a lot less into that extra money into it than we could have if we have more money, or am I wrong?
We've maintained our annual contributions. We've always
Right.
paid our annual
But
contributions.
not, we haven't been able to pay anything
But
more.
without the revenue sharing,
Yes.
it's exacerbated the problems within the general fund.
So
Correct.
there is that problem as well.
Correct.
Right.
And what's also, which I don't think realize is, when Prop A was put in, we can't recoup. It will take us 30 years to recoup the property losses from the '08 crisis. When Prop A was passed, nobody ever imagined that the housing market would collapse. And no one ever imagined that the home values in Port Huron went up 4% last year, but our property taxes only went up less than a tenth. It will take us more than 30 years to get back to the property tax level of 2008 under Prop A. That was never envisioned when that law was passed.
Those are issues that are all being talked about as well, are they not?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, I think it's a lawsuit on the revenue sharing that's in the
That's a
courts now.
Headley, the lawsuit there
Headley-
specifically on the
the
Headley
Headley.
formulation. That would mean to the city of Port Huron, it'd be some dollars, but very limited. Not as much as the revenue sharing as a whole than just regarding the Headley portion of
But
it.
every little bit helps.
I agree.
And it has been a factor across the Michigan, so it is a help. I did have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Councilmember
Oh,
Harris.
I was just going to bring up the fact, currently, or, and to kind of to the future, they're not going to go back, but there is a coalition in Macomb County who have appealed the state's reduction in revenue sharing, which I think is a legitimate expenditure. Right now, I mean, they're asking other people to join in. Now, I guess my question is, they're not going to go back, look at the future, but how did we get to the point where we didn't, or where we started accepting this?
So I think with the Macomb Coalition, which is suing on the basis of a Headley formulation, based on the state treasurer who was there when Headley was written, I think the courts will interpret it that it was formulated correctly. They put out that thing, the coalition Macomb originally started, I believe, in East Point. So I'm not quite sure how much validity that lawsuit has merit to. I've asked our legal counsel to look into it. Gary Fletcher and Todd Schaudy are looking into it to see if there's any merits that this thing actually will stand. And if it does, then maybe that's something we should look at. So I've asked legal to look into it.
I guess the second part of my question here is looking at the interest rates that Mr. Heffernan was talking, and you were talking about, and you anticipate 8.25% and things like that. Not to be commercialize it, but the Community Foundation in Port Huron probably has the best return on the dollar for anything in the area. And in their most recent report, they don't get anything near 8.25%. And where do they go to get these kind of monies? I mean,
So that's an excellent question. If you look at, if you look at the MERS valuation statement, the annual MERS report, the MERS fund is a very diversified investment portfolio. You have people's retirement and livelihood at stake, so they're not out and over aggressive formula. For instance, my own personal 457, I'm young, I can afford risk, I'm in a very risky portfolio. But as for MERS, a lot of them are muni bonds, real estate, a much more secure portfolio, which without the greater risk doesn't have the greatest interest rate. And so they're trying to, there's a fine line to walk with how they divide up that portfolio. And they try to be very responsible. And MERS will tell you that during the Great Recession, they didn't lose as much as anyone else did. Their losses were a lot less than other funds because of that conservative market.
Councilmember Ash.
He was next.
I just got three questions for you. I think I heard you say in 2015 that MERS had a negative return on its investment. What happened there?
It was a 1% negative return. And I think it's probably fair to say every public pension system that Plante Moran audits had a negative return that year.
Okay. And then what percent, I guess it's more for James now, what percentage or how many people in the city's employees are still in the full defined contribution, or defined benefit, I should say?
I actually don't have that percentage on the top of my head. I'll have to get back to you.
All right. And then lastly, after the 5-year bump that we are going to have here from MERS, what percentage funded would that get us to?
Actually, our fund rating is dropping. We're at 53% funded today. Next year, we'll have 49%. But that's using the 7.75 number. If you drop the funding level to 5.75 rates, which I believe is what a lot of economists are moving to, our current funded rate is about 30%. And so it will continue to drop for the next 5 years, and then we'll have to wait for the new experience study, but we're in that 30 to 40% funded right now.
Okay. And I've been through the bonding process with Macomb County. It worked out well for them, so depending on if that's something that we're going to be able to do, I think that's something I would support doing. it was a smart investment on their part and really shored up our pension plan there.
My concern with the bond, here's my concern, this I'm going to be completely candid. We need to bond. We're currently not legally allowed to. It is very beneficial. Oakland County, Macomb, Royal Oak's going with it, Ottawa County, Kalamazoo. My concern is what red tape and restrictions is the state of Michigan going to put on us to be able to bond. That's where I think the caveat of where they could come at us at. And so they know, the state of Michigan, the state treasurer, the legislature, they know we have to restructure the debt. They 100% know it. Because all these communities are not going to fall like dominoes. My concern is what restrictions and what mandates will they force us to do to get to the bonding? And I don't know what that looks like yet. And that's why I'm proud that I have a seat at the table on these conversations to try and be an advocate for Port Huron. When I met with the state treasurer, I took the city manager of East Lansing with me, George Lahanis. Plante Moran works with East Lansing. Very similar situations in East Lansing. And so, you know, we're trying to do this as a coalition. It's important that this is not just Port Huron problem. And so I think we can't convey that enough. But as we move forward, we'll try to continually update. It's going to be, I really want to see what the House and Senate look like, what the treasurer's got in mind, and what kind of, you know how it is. Anytime there's EVIP money or something like that, there's always like a million hoops and strings to go through, and you just don't know what that is. There's always a catch.
I guess one more question I just thought of is, what's it going to take to get us up to a AA bonding so that we could borrow, say if the state doesn't allow us to go to the A+?
So right now we were downgraded 3 times, and we were downgraded 3 times because of the utility deficits in the previous 5 years before I got here. When we raised our utility rates 2 years ago, we had an immediate S&P bond call that Ed Brennan and I traveled to Chicago and gave a presentation to the Standard & Poor's bond agency to tell them what we had done to remediate the deficits, which we still have deficits. We utilize the land purchase fund, but we put forth a solid financial model, which they change us from negative to outlook to stable. So the next outlook will go from stable to positive to upgrade. When you downgrade once, it takes 3 years to get back. So when we were downgraded 3 times in 4 years, it will take no less than 9 years to get back to where we were. We don't have that kind of time. And so the issue is we most likely will probably get an upgrade, a bond rate up. I would say we'll move from stable outlook now. I imagine the next bond call will move to positive if we keep our ship tight. And then maybe in a year, 2 years, we may see an upgrade. But if this continues to plague us and we don't address this issue, we could be at risk for another downgrade. And so that's why when people ask what does a bond rating mean to the city of Port Huron, a bond rating means this. In addition, we have $96 million of CSO debt out there. And we are continuously refinancing. You just issued refinancing notice of intent 2 months ago. So we'll take those notes that are at a higher interest rate and we'll refinance them to save money. That refinancing at a lower interest rate is based in huge part on our bond rating. And that's why the bond rating is so critically important that we maintain that for just such an occasion. So we're going to need the legislature to exempt us to get it done in time.
Anyone else down here have a question?
Mayor, I have one more question, if you don't mind.
Pro Tem?
James, talking again about the existing employees and then our future employees, and we know we'll have to adjust for lifespan, but is there anything else such as maybe not letting them retire so much or not having quite as large percentage when they retire that we're maybe thinking about looking at in the future?
You know, everything's on the table. There's one thing I have confidence in is, you know, we have a very good working relationship with our different labor groups here. I genuinely believe our labor groups want to do what's best for the city. They understand what's sustainable. And so they're paying so much of their pension now, and they're paying 10%. You see what the sacrifices our employees have done to reduce that cost in the city. That's not money that came out of thin air. That's money that came out of their pocket. That's money that our firefighters and police officers and DPW workers take out of their pocket to put in the pot so we don't have to. And that should be commended, and we shouldn't downgrade that. And so moving forward, I think we're going to continue that relationship with our labor groups. Just come to the table. Let's see what we can afford. Let's see what we can work out. That's what negotiations are for. So I think we'll continue monitoring it. I don't know right now until we get better information.
Did you? Yep. Councilmember Ashford?
Yeah, Jim, first of all, I'd like to commend you, for the the approaches you have taken, going all over the state of Michigan. And I was in SimCog the other week and heard your name and this issue that is before us right now. So I really commend you on that. But I would just like to know, as a council member, what can we do to help make a difference? I mean, we represent the people out here, and if this happens, if we don't get to see some light here, then we have to explain it to the people that we're serving. So I'm kind of worried about, not worried, but I'm kind of concerned about what can we do as council members. I know we could
I really
pass things
appreciate
up
that
here, but
question.
what can we do?
I appreciate that question. Communication with our retirees, with our pensioners, with our current city employees, with the citizens abroad. This is a highly complex issue. I know Joe and I get up here and we give a PowerPoint presentation and we make it sound like we're really intelligent. But I assure you, we have studied this so much, and it's so complex and it's so difficult. And I'm a financial guy, and Joe's clearly a lot brighter than I am. It's hard for a layperson on the street to understand these complex issues. And I know there's a hard-working mom or dad out there just trying to get on with their life, and they hear the word unfunded liabilities, and they just want to know, what does that mean to my daily life? What does that mean to me? And what it means to them is this issue inhibits our ability to have the police and fire and quality parks and recreation that we so desire. And so communication, letting them know that there's no one person to blame. I remember the Times Herald put out a story on this, that we were going to talk about this, and like the blame game started in the comment section. I wish there was one villain we could call out and blame, but this is a challenge that is affecting more than 100 cities, that's crept up more than 30 years in the making. And there's not one council, one mayor, one fund manager, one terrorist attack that hit the market or recession that happened. It's accumulation of a lot of things. In modern medicine, where people, instead of having a heart attack and dying, they get a stent and they live for 20 more years. We would have never factored that in 20 years ago. And so, we will have to spend a lot of time working together to solve this. But, I thought it was important to do these PowerPoint presentations. We're going to cut this down. We're going to put it on YouTube and put it on the city website on www.porthuron.org/opengovernment so people can watch this and find out what's going on. We're not raising taxes. We're not cutting benefits. People need to know that. We need to communicate that those are two constitutionally protected things that we cannot do. And so restructuring is our only option.
Oh, okay. So how can we help as council members?
Every time you're at the grocery store and in line waiting, talk to someone, tell them, hey, here's what's going on. When we get to a legislative prescription, there is going to be a time when we need to contact our legislators, our governor, and our senators. We need their help. We didn't get in this on our own. They helped put us in this hole to a certain degree. Now, there's no one villain, but I can think of 110 who've got some on their hands in Lansing. But we need to reach out and put some pressure on the legislature to act. To be quite frank, I released an op-ed that got published in 15 publications across the state. There are several other city managers who are going to be releasing op-eds. I spoke at the West Michigan Policy Conference this morning to 450 CEOs and business leaders from across the state. I keynoted the MML general session with 600 mayors and council members around the. We're trying to make this on the front page of every story so the state legislators have to know action is now. Indecision and inaction is not acceptable. Our retirees and our workers deserve a solution to this problem. This is an ethical challenge, and we have an obligation to find a solution.
So we can send letters, and we can put pressure on the legislation too, right?
He's in the audience tonight.
Yep, I see him back there.
Oh, okay. And also, I just have an observational comment. You know, your charts are very good up in here, but I think the next time I would like to see a compare, when you're comparing them, you're going from one slide to the other, if you would align them on the other, put them next to each other so we could sense the movement there. It's more,
One of the things as well we're working on, since you brought up the comparison, is I'm currently mining data from about 60 other communities, and I'm working with the Michigan Municipal League to assemble a database of current where all the other cities sit. So we don't just look at the city of Port Huron, let's look at all the other communities. I think it's important for the legislature to see that, look at everybody. That's a universal issue, so we are compiling that data as well, and I have that. I'll share that with you.
Oh, okay. That'd be great. Okay, other than that, thank you. Thank you, Mira.
Did anyone else have any comments? I would assume that you will keep us informed as you
Yes.
are meeting and when it gets to a point where we need to call out ourselves to the legislators.
Yes, and I just want to say I appreciate Joe. He's done a lot of work here. He's traveling. I'm sure he has a family at home to get home to. and I appreciate you taking the time to come.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.